What if all you needed was one sentence a day, to think clearly, to feel steadier, to live better? Not 5 steps, not another system, just one thought, repeated with quiet conviction, like a drop of calm falling into the chaos of your modern life. Because the truth is, you don't need more information. You need less noise. You need a way to return, again and again, to the place inside you that isn't shaken by traffic, deadlines, or someone else's opinion of who you should be. Maybe you've tried fixing everything on the outside. More books, more goals, more motivation. But peace was never meant to be something you chase. It's something you train. And training begins with a shift, not in the world, but in your response to it. In this video, you won't find lectures or lofty ideas. What you will find is something stronger. 8 timeless truths, grounded in lived experience and crafted for real people navigating real pressure. They are small enough to carry in your back pocket, yet deep enough to carry you through life's hardest days. If you've ever felt scattered, reactive, or simply overwhelmed by the speed of the world, this is your invitation. To slow down, to reset, to train your mind with just one thought a day and rebuild your inner strength from the inside out. Subscribe if you're ready. And if one thought today speaks to you, share your story below. Someone out there might need to hear it. 2. 1. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who observes them. Your thoughts come and go like waves, rising without warning, fading without command. They arrive in moments of silence, in the middle of meetings, when you're driving, eating, working, trying to sleep. Some are calm, some are violent. Some tell you you're not enough. Others tell you to fear the worst. And if you're not careful, you believe them, not because they're true, but because they're loud. But here's the shift that changes everything. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who sees them, the one who notices them pass by, the one who chooses whether to follow or release them. This space between thought and self, that's where your power lives. That's where freedom begins. In modern life, your mind is constantly being hijacked. Notifications, opinions, noise, pressure. Your attention is pulled 1,000 ways, and you're rarely told that you have the right and responsibility to take it back. Stoic philosophy speaks directly to this dilemma. It reminds us that mental clarity is not a gift, but a practice. That we don't need to stop our thoughts, but we do need to stop believing all of them. Because your thoughts are not always true, and they are not always yours. Many are echoes of fear, of old wounds, of things you consumed without filtering. But beneath all that clutter, there's still a witness. The part of you that simply watches, calmly, silently, unshaken. Strength comes when you live from that place. Imagine this. You're standing in line at the pharmacy, already tired, already late. A stranger bumps into you and mutters something rude. Instantly, a flood of thoughts rushes in. What's wrong with people? Why does this always happen to me? I should have said something. And suddenly your heart races, your jaw clenches, your mind spins. But what if, right in that moment, you pause? What if you breathe? What if instead of reacting, you observe? You name the thought, you recognize it, but you don't obey it. You let it pass, just like a cloud across the sky. That's what it means to train your mind. Not to suppress, not to run, but to observe without merging. To stand back from the chaos inside your head and realize, this thought is not me. It's just weather. Over time, the more you practice this, the less power those thoughts have over you. Anxiety comes, but you don't spiral. Doubt comes, but you don't freeze. Anger comes, but you don't lash out. You become steady, not because nothing moves you, but because you've anchored yourself deeper than the waves. This perspective doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. And presence is built through small daily recognition, one thought at a time. That's why this idea sits at the core of everything in this journey. Because if you don't understand that you're separate from your thoughts, you will always be enslaved by them. You'll always be at the mercy of your next mood, your next panic, your next irrational narrative. But once you step back and watch, really watch, you begin to choose. And choice is where personal power begins. There's a man I once knew who lived most of his life under a cloud of anger. Not the explosive kind, but the quiet, simmering kind. It showed up in how he spoke to his kids, how he treated his body, and how he withdrew from the people who cared. When asked why he was angry, he would always point outward, to the world, to injustice, to his past. But one day something shifted. Not because someone told him to change, not because he read a book, but because he finally noticed the voice in his head. The one always judging, always predicting the worst, always defending itself before anyone even attacks. He didn't argue with it, he just noticed it. And in that moment, he saw something he hadn't seen before. He wasn't angry. He was listening to angry thoughts and mistaking them for himself. From that day forward, he practiced separating the two. He slipped often, but he always returned. And over time, he softened. Not because life got easier, but because he stopped clinging to every storm that passed through his mind. You can do the same. You already have the ability. You've done it before without realizing, the moment you paused before sending a text you regretted, or chose to walk away from an argument you could have escalated. In those moments, you weren't your thoughts. You were something greater, the observer, the one in control. Now the task is to make that awareness more consistent, more conscious, more available when it matters most. When the mind floods you with fear, remind yourself, I see you, but I don't follow you. When the voice of self-doubt whispers that you're not ready, answer calmly, that may be your story, but I'm writing a different one. This isn't positive thinking. This is deliberate separation. The skill of living from the center, not the surface. From a Stoic point of view, this is emotional mastery in action. The ability to remain still when the world or your mind is loud. The refusal to let temporary emotion make permanent decisions. The daily discipline of choosing which thoughts you'll feed and which you'll let pass. Because your life becomes what your mind rehearses, not occasionally, but repeatedly. So when you wake up tomorrow, before the flood begins, ground yourself in this thought. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who observes them. Let it be the anchor that steadies you. Let it be the filter through which everything else passes. Let it return you, again and again, to the place within that no storm can shake. 2. Don't chase peace. Remove what disturbs it. Peace isn't something you run toward. It's not hiding in a new city, a new morning routine, or a better version of your to-do list. It's not earned by grinding harder or waking up earlier than everyone else. Peace is what remains when you stop feeding what disturbs it. When you no longer carry on conversations in your head that were meant to end weeks ago. When you stop holding space for people who don't respect your time or your boundaries. When you finally let go, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. That's when calm shows up. Not because you chased it, but because you stopped chasing everything else. We tend to think peace is distant, as if it exists somewhere we haven't arrived at yet. Like it's something we'll get once the work is done, once the house is quiet, once we've achieved something that tells us we finally deserve to exhale. But that's the trap. Because if your inner peace is always tied to external conditions, you'll always be waiting. Stoic philosophy teaches the opposite. It says, the calmer life you're looking for isn't outside you. It's already within. But it's buried under the weight of unnecessary burdens, overcommitments, unresolved tension, and unfiltered noise. There's wisdom in subtraction, in asking not what can I add to feel better, but what can I release to feel lighter. Imagine waking up tomorrow, and instead of rushing into solving everything, you pause and ask, what's quietly draining me right now? It might be the phone call you've been postponing, the argument you keep rehearsing in your head, the small lie you're still holding. It might be the social media feed that makes you angry before you even brush your teeth. Whatever it is, naming it is the first act of reclaiming your calm. And letting it go, even gently, even imperfectly, is the beginning of emotional clarity. I once spoke to someone who said, I feel like peace just isn't for me. I try all these habits, journaling, cold showers, meditation, but I still feel heavy. So we paused. I asked them what conversations they were still holding on to. They named 3. One with a parent, one with a colleague, and one with themselves. And in that moment, it was clear. They weren't lacking peace. They were clinging to pain, carrying stories that had already expired. And that's more common than we admit. We keep trying to build stillness on top of unresolved noise, and we wonder why it doesn't hold. That's why the Stoic approach is so enduring. It doesn't tell you to seek serenity. It tells you to understand the things that steal it. And usually it's not the world. It's what you allow, what you tolerate, what you keep justifying because it's familiar, even though it exhausts you. Peace isn't passive. It's not something you stumble upon. It's something you create, protect, and refine. And often, that means saying no. Not out of rejection, but out of alignment. Sometimes peace is as simple as a boundary you enforce without apology. You stop picking up the call that always ends in criticism. You stop agreeing to things that make you resentful. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't listening. This isn't harshness. It's clarity. The kind of clarity that lets your nervous system rest, that lets your mind stop spinning stories, that lets your heart breathe again. That's what peace feels like. Not silence, but space. And yet, choosing peace will sometimes feel like conflict. Because not everyone will be happy when you stop sacrificing yourself for their comfort. When you no longer respond within seconds. When you decide that your rest matters. But part of building inner strength is learning to live with that discomfort. To let people misunderstand you, judge you, dismiss you, and still protect what you've worked so hard to build within. A practical way to begin is this. Once a week, write down 3 things that are currently disturbing your mental clarity. Don't overthink it. Just write. Then ask, which of these can I remove, adjust, or stop feeding attention to this week? You don't have to change your whole life. You just have to lighten the load that you've been silently carrying. Because peace isn't a future reward, it's a daily discipline. A choice to stop pouring energy into what doesn't nourish you. Peace is the natural result of emotional discipline. And emotional discipline is a muscle you build by noticing what triggers you, then choosing not to be ruled by it. You don't need to force stillness. You just need to stop fueling the chaos. And that starts with one decision, repeated daily. I will no longer hold on to what keeps me restless. So no, don't chase peace. It's not ahead of you. It's beneath everything you're ready to release. Every time you let go of what disturbs you, mentally, emotionally, even physically, you create the space where calm can finally return. You don't need more things to do. You need fewer things to carry. And when you realize that, you'll stop running and start living lighter. 3. What you allow is what will continue. Every day, with every silence and every shrug, you're teaching people how to treat you. Not with words, but with what you accept. Not by what you say, but by what you tolerate. And the truth is, most people don't keep overstepping because they're strong, but because you've stepped aside too many times. Boundaries are not about aggression or control. They're about clarity, and clarity begins when you stop hoping others will respect you more than you respect yourself. Because what you allow, in conversations, in relationships, in daily patterns, will always set the standard for what continues. We all want peace, but many chase it through avoidance. We let uncomfortable moments slide, thinking we're keeping the peace, when in truth, we're just postponing discomfort. What you stay silent about today becomes the habit others form tomorrow. You may think you're being patient. You may think you're taking the high road. But there's a difference between calm and compliance. One is strength, the other is surrender. And in that quiet space between knowing you deserve better and choosing not to speak up, that's where most patterns of disrespect take root. Stoic thinking doesn't ask you to become reactive. It asks you to become discerning, to observe what keeps repeating, not because you're unlucky, but because something in you has allowed it. That may be hard to admit, but it's the beginning of self-command. You don't get what you wish for. You get what you stand for. And if you're always stepping around your own needs to avoid conflict, what you're really doing is abandoning yourself one compromise at a time. It's easy to believe that staying quiet keeps things easier. Letting small things go is just being mature. But silence, when repeated enough, stops being wisdom and starts becoming consent. Over time, your inner voice, the one that knew something didn't sit right, grows quieter. And in its place, resentment starts to whisper. Not loudly, but consistently. It shows up in your tiredness, in your low motivation, in that feeling of being drained even when nothing big has happened. It's not always burnout from doing too much. Sometimes it's exhaustion from accepting too little. There is no need to explain your worth to anyone, but you do need to define it to yourself. If someone constantly interrupts you and you keep smiling through it, you're teaching them that your voice doesn't need space. If someone dismisses your concerns and you change the topic to keep things light, You're showing them that your feelings aren't worth the wait. And if you constantly overextend, always being the one to adjust, to give more, to ask less, don't be surprised when that becomes the expectation. People respond not to what you say you deserve, but to what you settle for. This isn't about building walls. It's about reinforcing your center. It's about knowing that the way you protect your peace, your values, and your energy is not by arguing louder, but by living more deliberately. By pausing long enough to notice patterns, by naming what feels misaligned, and by making small but firm adjustments to stop those cycles from continuing unchecked. Training your mind as we explore in this journey means becoming aware of the hidden contracts you've signed, the ones where you agreed to be the one who bends, absorbs, endures. Contracts that were never written down, but were reinforced over time through repeated choices. And once you see them, you can change them. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. Begin by asking one question at the end of each day. What did I allow today that didn't sit right with me? Not to shame yourself, but to reclaim your responsibility. That reflection is your map. It points to where your power leaked and where it can be restored. You may not be able to control how others act, but you can control how often you stay silent in the face of it. You can choose to return to your values, your voice, your internal compass. And no, change doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's just a pause before you say yes. Sometimes it's an honest, "I'm not okay with that," said softly but firmly. Sometimes it's choosing to distance yourself from people who refuse to grow with you. These moments build upon each other. Over time, they become your new normal. A life that reflects your worth, not in theory, but in how you're treated, and how you treat yourself. So ask yourself now, what am I allowing? With my silence, my tolerance, my discomfort avoidance, that needs to stop. And what would my life look like if I began to shift that pattern today? You don't need anger to create change. You need clarity and the strength to say, this ends here. Not because I hate you, but because I finally remembered not to forget myself. The moment you hold the line, not in aggression, but in calm self-respect is the moment the world begins to meet you differently. Not because they changed, but because you did. For the world is noisy, silence is your power. There's a kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't interrupt, and doesn't rush to fill the space. It waits, it listens, it watches. And in that stillness, it grows sharper, stronger, more certain. In a world that rewards noise, more opinions, more reactions, more content, more outrage, silence becomes your edge. Not silence as escape, but silence as presence, as a restraint, as clarity in a culture addicted to sound. The modern world does not invite quiet. It floods your mornings with alerts, your evenings with opinions, and your in-between moments with distractions so well designed that you forget you ever chose them. Silence, then, is not just the absence of noise, it's a deliberate act of rebellion. A return to something essential, a way of remembering who you are beneath the pressure to always respond, perform, or explain. In silence, you become unpredictable. People who cannot read you cannot control you. When you stop answering everything instantly, when you no longer feel the need to correct, defend, or elaborate, you shift the dynamic. You become less reactive and more reflective. That's where inner strength lives. Not in how loudly you speak, but in how little you need to. The Stoics understood this. To them, wisdom wasn't just about what you said, but when and whether it needed to be said at all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a heated moment is to say nothing. Not because you're defeated, but because you're discerning. Because not every opinion deserves a reply. Not every accusation needs your energy. Not every request requires your immediate yes. Silence gives you the space to see things for what they are, not what your emotions demand they be in the moment. And that space, even just a few seconds, is often the difference between escalation and resolution, between regret and composure. You've likely felt this before. You're in a meeting or a family gathering and someone says something that feels like a provocation. You feel the rise, the urge to jump in, defend, correct, prove. But in that split-second pause, you catch it, you breathe. You hold your ground, not through force, but through stillness. And what happens next? Often nothing. The moment passes, the energy shifts. You realize that your silence wasn't weakness, it was control. It was proof that you are not ruled by every impulse or invitation to conflict. Silence also trains your mind. It creates room for clarity. Without space, your thoughts crowd each other, your focus scatters, and your judgment fogs. But when you give yourself even a few minutes of intentional quiet, walking without your phone, sitting without music, breathing without distraction, notice the deeper currents beneath the surface noise. You see what truly matters, what's worth addressing, what's safe to let go. In silence, your inner voice becomes clearer, not louder. And here's the paradox. The more silent you become, the more people listen when you speak. Because your words are no longer cheap or constant, they carry weight. They emerge from reflection, not reaction. In the same way, a paused breath commands more presence than a rushed one. Your silence teaches others to listen with more intention. It tells them, this person is not to be pushed, not to be rushed, not to be pulled out of alignment. From a Stoic point of view, silence is not passive, it is disciplined. It is the foundation of mental resilience. The quiet mind is not the empty one, it is the trained one. The one that who knows when to speak and when to hold, when to act and when to wait, when to challenge and when to detach. In that balance, you find a rare kind of confidence. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to feel secure. In daily life, this kind of silence can be practiced in small, deliberate ways. Don't respond to every notification immediately. Let certain messages sit. Choose stillness before you speak, especially when you're frustrated. Observe a conversation before inserting your point. Allow moments of pause, even awkward ones. And most of all, protect your mornings and nights from digital noise. Guard your bookends of the day with quiet. That's where your mental clarity resets. You'll find that the less you say, the more intentional your presence becomes. People notice what you pay attention to and what you don't. And you begin to notice something else too. How much noise in the world is just reaction without thought, motion without meaning. When you no longer feel the need to match that rhythm, you begin to move differently. More grounded, more deliberate, more free. So the next time the world demands a reaction from you, pause, breathe, say nothing. And in that stillness, reclaim your power. Because silence is not the absence of strength. It is its highest form. The loudest person in the room is often the least sure, but the one who holds their peace without fear, without apology, is already beyond persuasion, already rooted, already strong. 5. You can't control others, only how long you allow them to control you. There's a moment, quiet but undeniable, when you realize it's not the other person who's holding you hostage anymore. It's your own decision to keep staying, to keep explaining, to keep absorbing what you no longer deserve. And that shift, however uncomfortable, becomes the turning point. Most emotional entanglements don't continue due to someone's strength, but because you haven't decided where your boundary truly is. You can't control people, but you can control how long they get to rent space in your mind, disrupt your clarity, and drain your peace. Trying to fix others is one of the most exhausting roads you'll ever walk. You can pour your energy into explaining your worth, justifying your needs, and asking them to see what they refuse to. And for a while, you might feel noble for doing so. You might call it loyalty or compassion. But eventually, your body will tell you the truth. The fatigue will set in, your thoughts will cycle in the same unresolved loop, and you'll begin to realize this isn't a relationship, it's a negotiation of your self-respect. Control, when misunderstood, becomes control over others, but when mastered, it becomes command over your own attention, energy, and reaction. That's where Stoic thought shines. It doesn't waste time begging people to act better. It simply refocuses power where it always belonged, within. You don't have to respond to every message. You don't have to defend yourself in every conflict. You don't have to stay in dynamics that chip away at your sense of self. And you especially don't have to carry the weight of someone else's immaturity, emotional chaos, or passive control tactics. There's a type of manipulation that doesn't yell. It whispers. It keeps you second-guessing yourself, keeps you over-explaining, keeps you reacting, just enough to stay involved, but never enough to feel respected. And often, it's not obvious until you step back, until you create space. Until you stop responding, stop trying, stop overcompensating, and suddenly you see it clearly. They never changed, because they never had to. You were the one adjusting. This is why mental clarity is not just about thoughts, it's about relationships, because who you interact with shapes what you carry. And if you are constantly around people who refuse accountability, who twist conversations to preserve control, or who drain your energy in subtle ways, you begin to question your own balance. But the Stoic approach doesn't seek revenge or validation. It seeks emotional independence, a place where you are no longer controlled by how someone else acts, but by how you choose to respond, or not respond at all. One practical example. There's a person in your life who sends a message designed to provoke, a sarcastic comment, a subtle jab, a guilt trip. In the past, you might have responded immediately, explaining, defending, trying to keep the peace. But now you pause. You observe the emotion rising, but you don't follow it. You say nothing. You let the silence speak. And in doing so, you break a cycle that's been silently scripting your reactions for years. That's not weakness. That's redirected control. Because control doesn't look like domination. It looks like presence. It looks like no longer being emotionally hijacked by someone else's dysfunction. And once you taste that kind of freedom, the kind where your peace doesn't rise and fall with someone else's behavior, you begin to protect it like a sacred space. But make no mistake, choosing this path won't always feel good at first. It may feel like distance, like loss, like guilt, because we've been conditioned to believe that being a good person means enduring. But that's a dangerous confusion. Enduring what harms your spirit isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment. And the longer you allow someone to control you through emotional volatility, the harder it becomes to hear your own voice. So what do? You stop arguing with what's already shown itself. You stop waiting for their next words to validate your worth. You stop handing over the keys to your peace in exchange for temporary approval. Instead, you return to the center. You notice what's happening inside you. You pause before reacting. You hold the silence, and you protect your mental space like it matters, because it does. That's what training your mind truly means. Not learning how to change others, but mastering how not to be changed by them. To respond when necessary, and to release when it's not. To let someone's disapproval drift by like background noise, while your inner clarity remains intact. You don't do this with aggression. You do it with certainty, with practice, with quiet strength. Because in the end, control isn't about bending others. It's about no longer being bent by them. And the day you stop handing them the script for your emotions is the day you take back the role of author, not just of your mind, but of your life. 6. Today is the only day you can act. Not yesterday, not tomorrow. We tend to carry too much time in our minds. Regret from the past pulls us back. Worry about the future pulls us forward. And somewhere in between, we forget to stand firmly in the only moment that ever truly belongs to us. Today. Not yesterday with its unchangeable turns, not tomorrow with its unknown outcomes, but this quiet present moment where choice still lives. That's where your power is. And the longer you wait to act, the more life becomes a story of delay, not from lack of desire, but from misplacing time itself. You may believe you're waiting for the right moment, the perfect clarity, the sign that now is finally safe. But all waiting does is build distance between you and your goals, between you and your peace, between you and the kind of strength that only grows through movement, not meditation. There's nothing wrong with planning, but plans that don't begin become prisons, and intentions that never meet action turn into excuses in disguise. The Stoics knew this deeply, that time is not an infinite resource, and that a good life isn't built from good intentions, but from consistent action taken in the present. Think of how often you say, "I'll start tomorrow." It feels logical, it feels gentle, but it's a small silent retreat, and it stacks. One day becomes 2, 2 becomes 10. Eventually, the thing you were going to start becomes something you carry, not as progress, but as guilt. The workout you skipped, the apology postponed, the project you keep rewriting in your head. Not acting doesn't freeze time. It fills it with weight you can't see, but always feel. And it's not because you're lazy or unmotivated. It's because part of you still believes that later will be easier than now, but it never is. The truth is, the hardest part is rarely the action itself. It's the start, the moment you move from mental rehearsal into physical movement. The first email, the first 10 push-ups, the first 5 minutes of focused work. These small beginnings are the real battleground, because they confront the illusion that your future self will be more disciplined, more focused, more ready. But you don't need your future self. You only need a few steady breaths and one clear decision today. There's a kind of clarity that arrives when you stop trying to solve your whole life and just ask, what matters today? Not everything, just one thing. Just enough to shift your energy from passive thinking to deliberate doing. That shift may be quiet, it may feel insignificant, but done consistently, it rewrites your story. You stop seeing yourself as someone who delays, doubts, or overthinks, and start seeing yourself as someone who acts, even imperfectly, even in uncertainty. And no, this doesn't mean you must hustle endlessly or crush some grand to-do list. Action doesn't always mean acceleration. Sometimes it means picking up the phone to call someone you've been drifting from. Sometimes it's deciding not to open your inbox first thing in the morning. Sometimes it's sitting quietly with your thoughts for 10 minutes before the world gets loud. The power of today lies not in how much you do, but in how intentionally you do it. The Stoics didn't believe in rushing life, but they did believe in urgency, not the frantic kind, but the kind that comes from understanding how finite each day is. You act like mortals in all that you fear, Seneca once said, and like immortals in all that you desire. We put off what matters most, as if there's always another chance. But tomorrow is not a guarantee, only today is. And the more you connect with that truth, the more grounded and focused your actions become. If there's something weighing on you, an unmade choice, a conversation you're avoiding, a goal you keep circling around, ask yourself why it hasn't started yet. Then ask, what would it take to move 1 inch forward today? Not the whole thing, just the first step. Often, the resistance we feel is not about the task itself, but about the idea that we need to be perfect before we begin. But perfection is the enemy of progress, and progress is built one imperfect day at a time. So pause right now and take a breath. Let go of yesterday's missteps. Let go of tomorrow's uncertainty. Ask yourself, quietly and clearly, what can I do today with what I have to move toward the life I respect? Then do that, and let that be enough. Not because it fixes everything, but because it breaks the cycle of postponement. In the end, the power of today is not in how much you conquer, it's in how you choose. Whether you give in to delay or give yourself to the moment. Because while you can't rewrite the past and you can't predict the future, you can shape the only thing that ever truly belongs to you. This day, this hour, this choice. Let it count. Let it move. Let it begin. 7. Discipline is more powerful than motivation. There are days when your alarm goes off and your body says no. Days when the plan you made last night feels too heavy to follow through. Days when the voice in your head says, skip it, just today. And if you're relying on motivation to carry you through, those days win. Because motivation is emotion, and emotion is unreliable. It shifts with mood, weather, sleep, and doubt. But discipline shows up anyway. Not loudly, not perfectly, just steadily, like a quiet agreement between your current self and the future you're trying to become. Real change doesn't happen when you're inspired. It happens when you're consistent, especially when you're not inspired. That's what separates people who drift from people who build. One waits to feel like it. The other has built a structure that doesn't ask for permission from their feelings. That structure is discipline, not the rigid kind that suffocates, but the anchored kind that holds you when motivation lets go. And it will let go, often, especially when you're tired, especially when progress feels slow, especially when no one's watching. In a world that glorifies the hustle and celebrates the high points, we forget that most transformation is boring. It looks like repetition, like showing up to the gym on a rainy Tuesday, like writing another page when the words don't come easily, like practicing patience in a moment when everything in you wants to react. These acts don't feel heroic. They feel ordinary, but over time they shape you in ways no motivational quote ever could. That's the essence of Stoic living. Doing what's right, not what's easy, and doing it, especially when you don't feel like it. Because your feelings are visitors. They pass through, but your actions are bricks. They build something. You won't always wake up with clarity. You won't always feel ready, but discipline makes that irrelevant. It doesn't ask you how you feel. It just asks you to take the next step. There's power in small rituals. The cup of water you drink before coffee, the decision to lace up your shoes even if you only have 10 minutes to walk, the habit of checking in with your thoughts before checking your phone. These moments look small, but they're not. They're signals, proof that your mind is not being dragged around by emotion, but directed by intention. And when life becomes unstable, when setbacks hit, when routines get broken, it's those disciplines that help you return to center. One of the reasons motivation fades is that it's built on outcomes. You want to feel excited because you see the reward, but discipline is built on identity. You keep showing up because it's who you are now, not because you're chasing a number or waiting for applause, but because your internal compass points in that direction, with or without external confirmation. That's why discipline lasts. It grows from within. It doesn't depend on who's watching, how you feel, or what the day brings. It simply asks, will you show up anyway? There will be moments when your progress feels invisible, when the work feels too slow, the results are too far. But in those moments, discipline isn't just a tool. It's protection. From doubt, from distraction, from the urge to start over again and again, never giving anything time to take root. Because the truth is, most people don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because they keep starting and stopping. Discipline ends that cycle. It carries you through the dull days, the invisible days, the days when nothing happens except that you didn't quit. So if you're waiting to feel ready, stop. If you're hoping for the perfect wave of motivation to carry you into action, let it go. Instead, ask yourself one question each morning. What would discipline look like today? Not someday, not ideally, just today. Then do that, even if it's small, especially if it's small, because that one act, repeated, becomes a path, and that path becomes your identity. And from there, momentum builds, quietly, without hype, without applause, just one day at a time. Discipline is how you build self-respect. It's how you trust yourself again after too many broken promises. It's how you move from intention to transformation. So when the feeling fades, don't chase it, don't beg it to come back. Just stand where you are and take one small step. That's more than enough. Because in the end, motivation might inspire you, but only discipline can change you. 8. You are what you repeat. Change doesn't begin with a decision. It begins with a pattern. Not the one you dream about, but the one you practice, day after day, often without even noticing. Every time you hit snooze, check your phone before thinking, postpone that hard conversation, or choose ease over effort, you reinforce an identity. Not because you're lazy, but because repetition always wins. You don't become what you intend, you become what you repeat. This truth can either discourage or empower you, depending on how you respond to it. On one hand, it reveals that your life is not shaped by grand gestures, but by quiet routines. On the other hand, it gives you control. You don't need to change everything overnight. You just need to change what you practice. Because habits, even small ones, are not just actions. They are votes for who you believe you are. And over time, they either sharpen your character or blur it. There's a quiet dignity in the everyday. The cup of water before coffee. The moment of stillness before reacting. The choice to walk instead of scroll. The decision to end the day with intention rather than distraction. These small acts don't seem like transformation, but they are. They're subtle declarations of value, quiet agreements between your future self and the present one who chooses on their behalf. They don't scream, they compound. From a Stoic perspective, identity is not something fixed or gifted. It's trained. You don't become calm by reading about calm. You become calm by repeatedly choosing not to argue, not to overreact, and not to seek validation when it's unnecessary. You don't become resilient by wishing for strength. You become resilient by rising through repetition, by continuing even when no one claps, no one watches, and nothing external rewards you for trying. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking big. A new year comes, a crisis hits, or inspiration strikes, and suddenly you want to overhaul your life. Wake up earlier, cut all distractions, build a perfect version of yourself from scratch. But most of that collapses because it's built on emotion, not rhythm. Real change is never sudden. It's steady. It's not found in the 10 new habits. It's found in one habit, repeated until it becomes who you are. Think about someone who seems grounded, the kind of person whose presence feels solid even when things fall apart. That calm doesn't come from talent. It comes from a trained response. It comes from having practiced how to stay composed when most would spiral. The truth is, they weren't born with it. They built it through repetition, through showing up for their routines when life felt too loud to hear anything clearly. And so can you. Ask yourself what patterns you've been repeating lately, not just in behavior, but in thought. The way you speak to yourself in quiet moments, the story you tell yourself about your worth, your limits, and your possibilities. Because those internal loops matter more than any morning routine. What you rehearse, you become. What you allow mentally becomes what you manifest physically. That's not wishful thinking. That's structure. That's psychology. That's philosophy grounded in discipline. So if you want a different life, stop chasing a different outcome. Start creating a different rhythm. Ask, what's one thing I already do that makes me better? And how can I do it more deliberately? And what's one thing I allow each day that drains me? And how can I begin to replace it? Not perfectly, just consistently. Change isn't about adding pressure, it's about adding presence, awareness, ownership. There's nothing glamorous about repetition. It won't trend, it won't go viral, but it will change your life. Because the mind doesn't respond to intensity, it responds to consistency. That's why even the smallest daily shift matters more than the occasional breakthrough. Progress happens quietly. Identity forms slowly. But once it takes root, it becomes nearly unshakable. Because it's not something you chase, it's something you become through action. So each day, you choose to live on autopilot or to move with attention, to repeat what numbs you, to repeat what strengthens you. You don't have to be extreme. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be honest. What am I rehearsing? Because that rehearsal, in thought, in action, in belief, is writing your future, whether you see it or not. In the end, change doesn't ask for drama. It asks for rhythm. The rhythm of someone who no longer relies on hope, but on habit. The rhythm of someone who doesn't need to prove anything, because they've already proven to themselves that they'll show up. Quietly, repeatedly, intentionally. And that's what builds a life of integrity. One silent vote at a time. In a world full of noise, distractions, and emotional chaos, the ability to train your mind with just one clear thought each day becomes not only a practice, but a necessity. You are not your thoughts, but the one who observes them. You can't control everything, but you can choose your response. The world may provoke you, rush you, misjudge you, but your peace is yours to protect. And that protection starts not with a grand change, but with a quiet daily habit. Each idea we've explored is not just philosophy, it's action. Action you can return to every morning, regardless of mood or motivation. Because the person you're becoming is shaped not by what you feel, but by what you repeat. If you want inner strength, don't wait for it. Build it, slowly, silently, one disciplined thought at a time. So pause for a moment now and ask yourself, which thought will guide you tomorrow? What truth will you come back to when life pulls you off course? If one of these ideas spoke to you, I invite you to share your story below. Someone else may be searching for the same strength you've just begun to uncover.